things that's been so interesting is like Joanna's systems really influenced my yearning for systems, right? Like I remember, I was telling you the other day when I was working at the Ruckus Society, there was so much pushback all the time about like, direct action. How is that useful? There's surely got to be a better strategy. And like, everyone should only be doing this, and bringing Joanna's work into it and being like, actually, it's a whole system that interacts with each other. That felt like, oh, there's this rudimentary way that we can understand like how these systems work. And then, oh, there it is. Exactly. So Ruckus was very much in the holding actions, right? It was like, we want to stop the bad from happening and hold the line and like make more room for those shifts in consciousness that allow us to move into new systems, right? And I felt like, oh, once you understand that, like, that's the move, I feel like one of the things I want to really bring up is I love that this really aligns for me with the movement generation concept of like, there's the false solutions. And it's like, we have to stop the false solutions. We have to help people shift inside themselves and then inside the system what is politically possible so that we can actually move towards the revelatory visions. And I think it's not a mistake that so many of us are noticing these like, oh, these things all go together. And so when I started thinking about like, so then what kind of movement would reflect those pieces, all of that being a part of things. I was reading Octavia Butler. I had read Joanna's work. I had read Margaret Wheatley's work. I had interacted with a bunch of organizers on the ground. And I was just like, there's something here, trying to like pull it all into like one concept. And Emergent Strategy feels like as close as I could get right now. So it's right. Like 6 elements, there's these 9 principles, and to me, it's like the elements are kind of like, here's what the world is made of, and here's how the principles are like, here's how it can all dance. But I feel like, oh, how do we bring it off the page and make it live for people, right? I'm like, oh, what can I imagine? So I was like, oh, being adaptive. That's something I can imagine people like challenging themselves. It's very tangible. Like how we respond to change is actually incredibly tangible. It's like one of those things where I'm like, you can turn and ask anyone in your family, anyone in your community, like, how do I respond to change, right? And they would tell you lots of things about that, right? They're like, what I got when I asked that question was like, oh, you really like, you love changes that you create and that you initiate. You're very resistant to changes that someone else suggests, especially if they relate to your schedule. You're really into like big ideas of like societal change, right? And I think I'm similar to a lot of movement people in that I'm like, I'm a visionary. I can see the whole, but then when it comes to like, oh, I'm going to have to change and people are going to push against me to make that change happen. That's where, to me, the rubber hits the road around like, we're going to create something new. And so many of the tools of Emergent Strategy are like, how do we soften ourselves to be able to respond to the changes that are needed of us that don't emerge and start inside of us, right? Where someone else says to you, the way you've been holding power or privilege has to change. The way you've been structuring love and relationship and the way you've been manipulating capital in your life needs to change. And to me, that's where we move from like the individual. Because I think a lot of us, probably everyone on this call, has had those experiences. We go off as an individual and we're just like, I understand, we're all connected. That happens, right? You're like, yes. Okay. And then where do you go? And I think the next place you go is actually into generative